It was a crisp Monday morning when Harold Bryant stepped off the downtown bus and into the heart of the city's financial district. He stood for a moment, adjusting the collar of his worn gray shirt, his arthritic fingers struggling against the chill. The buildings towered above him, glass and steel monuments to wealth and ambition. He stared up at them, unbothered by their grandeur. After all, he hadn't come to admire architecture. He had come to open a simple bank account. Harold was a proud man. A retired postal worker, a father of 3, and a grandfather to 6. He had worked for 40 years, paid his dues, and lived with quiet dignity. His son, Malcolm, was a different breed, sharp, relentless, a self-made CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. But Harold never let the fame or fortune go to his head. He still took the bus, still shopped with coupons, still greeted every stranger with a nod and a smile. When Harold stepped into Norwest Federal Bank, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, invisible. No one greeted him. No one offered help. The lobby was sleek and modern, filled with men and women in tailored suits and expensive watches. He approached the reception desk slowly, ID in hand, his steps uneven but purposeful. "Good morning," he said kindly to the young woman behind the counter. She barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, just here to open a checking account." She sighed and handed him a clipboard. "Fill this out." Harold nodded, taking the form and finding a seat in the waiting area. Across the room, a well-dressed white man in his 30s leaned against the teller counter. He was the branch manager, Eric Dalton. Arrogant, sharp-tongued, and all too eager to remind people of his authority. When Harold returned the clipboard, the receptionist glanced over it and called Eric over. "Mr. Dalton, this gentleman needs to open an account." Eric glanced at Harold, then at the form. "Do you have identification?" Harold held out his state-issued ID with a slight smile. Eric took it, barely looking at it before frowning. "This ID is expired." "I renewed it. They gave me a paper temporary." "It's in my wallet," Harold said, reaching into his back pocket. Eric held up a hand. "Sir, if your identification is not current, we can't help you." Harold, undeterred, pulled out the temporary document and extended it. Eric took it with a sigh, gave it a cursory glance, then without warning, let both the ID and the paper slip from his hand. They fluttered to the floor. A silence fell over the bank lobby. Harold bent down slowly, painfully, to retrieve them. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked them up. "I don't think this place is a good fit for you," Eric said flatly. Harold stood upright, saying nothing. His eyes, though tired, held a piercing clarity. Not of anger, not of hurt, but of disappointment. "I understand," Harold said simply. He turned and walked toward the exit. Every pair of eyes followed him. Some pitiful, some indifferent. None dared speak. Outside, the sun had risen higher. Harold stood on the curb, looking back once, then pulled out his flip phone and dialed a number. It rang once. "Hey, Pop," came the voice on the other end. Harold's voice was calm. "Malcolm, I need you to meet me at Norwest Federal. Downtown branch." There was a pause. "Everything okay?" Harold exhaled. "Just come." 30 minutes later, a black Range Rover pulled into the front parking slot. Out stepped Malcolm Bryant, mid-40s, tall, composed, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. As he walked into the bank, phones went down. Conversations paused. He carried the quiet authority of someone who commanded boardrooms. He saw his father waiting on one of the lobby chairs. Harold stood. Malcolm didn't smile. "What happened?" Before Harold could answer, Eric appeared again. His smug expression returned. "Can I help you?" Malcolm turned to face him. "You already did. I'm Malcolm Bryant." Eric blinked. I'm sorry I don't. CEO of Orin Technologies, Malcolm said coldly. We were scheduled to initiate a $5 billion transfer through your institution this Friday. Eric straightened. Yes, of course. Mr. Bryant, I had no idea. Malcolm raised a hand. You knew exactly who my father was. You just didn't know who I was. You disrespected him. Eric stammered. It was a misunderstanding. Malcolm stepped closer, eyes cold. You made my father kneel on the floor for his own ID. You embarrassed a man 10 times the human you'll ever be. Eric paled. The staff behind the counter were silent, frozen. Consider our relationship with Norwest terminated, Malcolm said. He looked to his father. Let's go, Pop. As they walked out, whispers rippled through the bank. Harold didn't say a word. But the silence he left behind said everything. Malcolm Bryant's decision to terminate the $5 billion deal with Norwest Federal Bank made headlines by the next morning. Business news outlets, financial bloggers, and even mainstream media platforms carried variations of the same headline. CEO pulls mega deal after father disrespected by bank manager. For Eric Dalton, the arrogant branch manager, the fallout was immediate and severe. He arrived at work to find a cluster of corporate auditors already reviewing customer service footage. The bank's senior executives, alarmed by the media storm, descended upon the branch in person. You let a legacy client walk out the door, one of them said coldly. And you humiliated his father. On camera. Eric tried to defend himself, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that he hadn't intended to be disrespectful. But no amount of corporate jargon could hide the truth captured on surveillance footage. The way he had let the ID fall to the floor, the way Harold bent with effort to retrieve it, the condescending tone of voice, the cold dismissal. Within hours, Eric was relieved of his duties. Not just suspended, fired. Meanwhile, Malcolm received dozens of emails from rival banks, each trying to salvage what Norwest had lost. Offers came with promises of lower transaction fees, customized services, even philanthropic partnerships. But Malcolm remained silent, choosing not to respond immediately. This wasn't about banking anymore. Harold, on the other hand, was hesitant about all the attention. Son, you didn't have to make such a fuss, he said as they sat in Malcolm's spacious office overlooking the skyline. Malcolm leaned forward. It wasn't a fuss, Dad. It was a statement. Harold sipped from the mug of tea in his hands. Back in my day, we just swallowed that kind of thing. Kept our heads down. And that's exactly why it still happens, Malcolm replied. You taught me to stand up for what's right. This wasn't just about you. It's about every man or woman who's been treated like they don't matter. Harold said nothing for a long moment. But his eyes were soft, proud. Across town, Eric struggled to hold together what remained of his reputation. His LinkedIn profile became a war zone of criticism. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Clients backed away. He filed appeals with HR, claimed wrongful dismissal, but the bank had made up its mind. The optics alone were irreversible. Days later, the story took another turn. A clip from the bank's surveillance cameras surfaced online. It showed everything: Harold's gentle approach, Eric's indifference, the moment the ID fluttered to the floor, and the humbling silence that followed. The video went viral. Millions watched, reposted, and commented. Hashtags like #RespectOurElders and #NotJustAnID trended across platforms. Among those who watched the video was a young journalist named Aisha Thomas. Working for a major news magazine, she was moved not just by the incident but by the dignity Harold displayed. She reached out to Malcolm and requested an interview with his father. Malcolm deferred the decision to Harold. She just wants to talk, Pop. No cameras. Just your story. Harold agreed. They met at a small diner, the kind with cracked leather booths and old jazz playing softly in the background. Aisha asked gentle, respectful questions. "Did you feel angry that day?" Harold shook his head. "No. Just tired. Tired that a man my age, after a life of honest work, still had to prove he was worth basic respect." Her article was published 3 days later under the title, "A Name, a Face, a Father." It painted Harold not as a victim, but as a symbol of quiet strength. A reminder that decency was not a privilege reserved for the wealthy or well-dressed. The piece resonated across generations. Malcolm read it alone in his office, his eyes stinging by the final paragraph. He remembered being a boy, watching his father work double shifts, come home with cracked hands and a tired smile. Everything he had built, every company, every deal, every dollar, traced back to that man. In a meeting later that week, Malcolm addressed his executive team. "We're moving our operations to Integrity Capital," he announced. One of the VPs raised an eyebrow. "They're small. Not even top 10. Malcolm nodded. "But they treat people like people. That's what I want our partners to reflect." Integrity Capital was stunned when they received the signed agreement. Not just for the funds but for Malcolm's request that a portion of their combined profits be directed toward community outreach programs focused on elder respect and dignity. It was more than a business decision. It was a movement. As Harold walked with Malcolm through the new banking center, he paused at the entrance. "Didn't think I'd ever matter to the world this much," he said quietly. Malcolm smiled. "You always did, Dad. The world just took a little too long to notice." 2 months had passed since the incident at Norwest Federal Bank, but its impact continued to ripple through the financial world. Malcolm Bryant's bold stance had sent a message, one that reverberated far beyond his own company. Across the industry, institutions began re-evaluating customer service policies, employee conduct standards, and even diversity and sensitivity training. But for Harold Bryant, life had returned to a quiet rhythm. He still took the bus, still went for his morning walks, still waved at the neighborhood kids. But something had changed. Wherever he went, people recognized him. Strangers greeted him by name. Letters poured in, from seniors, veterans, young professionals, even schoolchildren. Many thanked him for standing tall without raising his voice. Some shared their own stories of being dismissed or overlooked. At first, Harold found the attention uncomfortable. He had never sought the spotlight. But with every heartfelt letter and respectful handshake, he began to understand that his quiet dignity had spoken louder than any viral video or business decision. One afternoon, Malcolm invited his father to a community event hosted by Integrity Capital and Orin Technologies. The two companies had partnered to launch a program called Dignity First, aimed at promoting elder respect, financial literacy for seniors, and intergenerational mentorship. The event was held at a local civic center, where a modest stage had been set up. Dozens of chairs were filled with attendees, and a banner overhead read, "It's never too late to be seen." When Malcolm took the stage to speak, he didn't talk about profits or strategy. "I'm here today because of a man who taught me the meaning of strength," he began. "Not strength through power, strength through patience, through integrity, through walking away when it would be easier to fight. That man is my father." Applause echoed through the hall as Malcolm looked to Harold in the front row. Slowly, he rose to his feet and walked to the stage amid a standing ovation. Harold stood quietly for a moment behind the podium, taking it all in. Then he cleared his throat. "I spent my life believing that if you worked hard and stayed decent, that would be enough. And for the most part, it was. But sometimes, dignity isn't just something you hold on to. It's something others need to see in you, so they remember to look for it in themselves." He paused, letting the words settle. "I didn't kneel in that bank because I was broken. I kneeled because I've knelt before in life, in service, in prayer, in pain. And every time I got up stronger. Not because the world gave me strength, but because I remembered who I was. The room was silent. Not out of awkwardness, but reverence. After the event, as people lined up to shake Harold's hand, he noticed a familiar face at the end of the line. A young black man, no older than 20, with nervous eyes and a firm grip on a well-worn notebook. "Mr. Bryant," the young man said. "My name's Deshaun. I saw what happened at the bank. I wanted you to know, I'm trying to be the first in my family to go to college. I never had someone to look up to. Until now." Harold blinked, moved. "You go get that education, son," he said, gripping Deshaun's shoulder. "And when you get where you're going, hold the door open for the next one behind you." Deshaun nodded, eyes glassy. Back at Malcolm's office later that week, a board member brought news. A prominent investment firm had decided to reallocate its portfolio based on the Dignity First model. Several others followed. Malcolm knew the ripple was becoming a wave. "Your father changed something real," the board member said. Malcolm looked out the window toward the horizon. "He always does. Quietly but deeply." Meanwhile, Norwest Federal had become a case study in corporate misjudgment. The new management team issued public apologies, promised reforms, and even reached out to Malcolm requesting reconciliation. He declined. "Forgiveness is personal," he told them. "Trust is professional. And you lost both." Harold, for his part, bore no grudge. When asked by a local reporter if he had any message for Eric Dalton, he said, "I hope he learns from it. I hope he becomes better. That's all any of us can do." In the end, it wasn't the $5 billion that changed the world. It was a man who carried himself with quiet grace, even while stooping to pick up what another had thrown away.